I'd like to thank everyone for joining our meeting tonight. This is the fall meeting for the Bud Metheny chapter of SABR. We are located in Hampton Roads, Virginia. We are lucky to have as a guest tonight Noel Hynd. Noel is an American novelist and journalist, best known for his gripping espionage thrillers and supernatural mysteries. He was born in New York City, graduated from University of Pennsylvania, and resides in Southern California. His works span the Cold War, Middle East, and the world of covert operations, often blending historical detail with fast-paced plots. Noel has sold over 5 million copies of his books nationwide. Noel has also been a frequent contributor to various magazines, including Harper's, Sports Illustrated, World Traveler, The Reader's Digest, and the Pennsylvania Gazette, the alumni magazine of the University of Pennsylvania, for whom he is the monthly sports columnist. Here are several of the sports-related, primarily baseball, nonfiction books that he's written. The Giants of the Polo Grounds, The Glorious Times of Baseball's New York Giants, wrote that in 1988. Marquard and Seeley, which is a book about a sports show business crossover story about pitcher Rube Marquardt and entertainer Blossom Seeley. That was written in 1996. The Final Game at Ebbets Field and Other True Accountings of Baseball's Golden Age. That was written in 2019. And the Sputnik season, 1957, the year New York City baseball and America changed forever. That was released in 2022. We'll be discussing Noel's latest book, A Brooklyn Guy, Otto Miller, the greatest Brooklyn Dodger you never heard of. Welcome, Noel, and thanks for joining us.
Thank
Hey,
you. Thank you very much.
before we get to your latest book, what book or book series that you've written would you recommend to us for our entertainment?
Well, certainly all of them. But more specifically, it kind of depends what your interests are. You can tell that mine span several topics. The series that I get the most mail about and that sells best are my espionage stories, which started with, well, they started really in the 1970s, but I started a series in the mid 1980s with a book called Flowers from Berlin. It was about a plot to assassinate Franklin Roosevelt before the start of World War II. And the premise, of course, was that the country, the United States, for better or worse, was filled with a lot of isolationists who wanted to keep the United States out of the war. Roosevelt felt that the getting involved in Europe was something that was protecting American interests. Anyway, the book sold very, very well at the time, and then publishers being what they are, they kept it out of print for many years, like about 20 years after it had done very well in paperback. So I finally got the rights back in 1999, which is a shorthanded way of saying I threatened to sue them over that and several other things. And they finally decided to get rid of me by giving me the rights back. But then I kept getting, so I republished it myself in my own small publishing imprint here in Los Angeles, and it did rather nicely. And I started to get mail from people saying, "Well, what happened to these characters? You left us off in 1940." And they're saying, "Hey, man, it's like 2010 night right now. They must have had the rest of their lives." So it nudged me into creating a series. So you can see if you go to Amazon or you Google my name, you'll see a lot of books with such and such in Berlin. And that's kind of the series that most people seem to like. Baseball is really kind of a niche thing. For the reading public. I mean, compared with like romance novels, baseball hardly sells anything. Um, there's a when folks like us turn up at a SABR conference, yeah, wow, there seems to be a lot of us. But scatter those 500 people across the country, and there really aren't that many. So anyway, so that's sort of the long-winded answer to your question.
Got it. All right, that's interesting. I will try and find that because that's the type of stuff, kind of historical fiction is the things I like to read about. So that'll
Yeah,
be,
it's all based on fact, and it's edgy, it's down and dirty, um, but it's not really over the line. It's just, and oddly enough, as strange as it sounds for a topic like this, I maintain a certain sense of humor throughout. I mean, because some things are just so horrible, you got to stand back from them and shake your head and grin sometime. Anyway, let's talk about Otto Miller.
all right. Tell us about
Okay.
Otto Miller.
The first thing I'll tell you about him is when I do these presentations, since he's from Brooklyn, often in trying to form what I'm trying to say, I refer to him as Arthur Miller because Arthur Miller is the best known Miller from Brooklyn. But
Yeah.
so forgive me if I do that. And instead, I'm going to take you guys back about 100 years, 120 years to take a look at the life of the greatest Brooklyn Dodger that most people have never heard of. That's Otto right there, obviously on your right. I hope you guys can see my cursor moving around here. There it is, because I'm going to use it liberally as I talk to you. I've got about 70 slides, and most of them I imagine you've never seen before. Right here, we're going to get to this later on in a few minutes. That's the American flag. This was the Brooklyn Dodger uniform in 1917 after the World War I began. Dodgers were a very patriotic institution at the time. They were the defending champions that year, so Old Glory goes on the uniform. Um, anyway, when I was writing, I'm going to try to move all this stuff so I can see it. Does that interfere with your screen? I'm moving stuff around here. When I was writing 4 other baseball books, I kept coming across the name Otto Miller. He was a Brooklyn Dodger for 24 years. I'd never heard of him. So why not? I decided to find out who he was. Here's Otto now. So let's start. That's Otto as a coach around 19, maybe 1930 or so. Otto Miller was born in Minden, Nebraska in 1889 during the administration of Benjamin Harrison. You don't get to see Benjamin Harrison that much in SABR presentations, but we got him tonight. Rather dignified looking guy, right? Anyway, Miller is a big, tough, strong kid. He grew up in Indianapolis after the family moved back from um, uh, Nebraska. Nebraska, by the way, when Miller was born, was the edge of the frontier. If you kept going west, you would go past where the railroad lines went, and you were most likely, what's the nicest way to say it, liable to run into some unhappy Native Americans who did not have a fairly formal immigration policy and were not very happy with the settlers coming into their land. Anyway, Miller played sandlot baseball in Indianapolis. By age 20 in 1909, he signed a Class D contract with Duluth, Minnesota White Sox um, of the, I think it was the Northern League. Flashback to Brooklyn. At this time, this guy was the catcher for Brooklyn. That's Bill Bergen. Bill Bergen is loved by SABR people because he has the lowest lifetime batting average of any man ever to have 2,500 or more plate appearances. Most recently, Joey Gallo has given him a run for his money. I think Joey's hovering around 181 or something right now, either a home run, a walk, or a strikeout. Um, I must stress, Bergen was a very good ball player, but catching in the dead ball era was a very, very defensive position. So teams frequently carried a guy who hit 190 or 200. Here's Charlie Ebbets, who was getting rid of something on my screen here, who wanted more offense out of the catching position because he saw other teams in the National League with catchers who could at least hit the 2 or 3 home runs a year and bat 210. After a good training camp in Hot Springs, Arkansas, Otto Miller won a spot with Brooklyn as the third string or bullpen catcher. What did that mean? That meant that he basically wouldn't get into very many games over the course of the year. That's a picture of Miller around the time he first came to Brooklyn. Here's how it looked in 1910. The Brooklyn squad coming north from Arkansas. I'm working the cursor again. You can see Miller, I think, down here in the front row. Notice, by the way, and we'll see this again, I'm running the cursor. Can't see it that well here, but he's clutching his catching equipment. Catching equipment was more had more craft and workmanship, more leather than other equipment for the players. You did not want to use your catcher's glove. Otto hit only 167 in 1910, but in 1911, which is the date of this picture, he hit 210. Pretty good, not bad for a rookie. Bill Bergen hit 132 in 1911. So Charlie Ebbets could do math as well as just about anybody. He saw a guy who's much younger, cheaper, who hit 90 points higher or 80 points higher, and it sealed Bergen's fate. He was sold off to Newark of the International League, and Miller became alternately the second or third string catcher in Brooklyn, but he started to see more playing time. That's the Brooklyn manager. Bill Dolan announced that Otto would be the starting catcher in 1912, and Miller was outstanding at calling a game and handling trick pitches like spitters and scuff balls. Again, we're in the dead ball era, and almost anything you could do to a baseball was allowed. And that's one thing that kept batting averages down, but it also made pitches very difficult to control. Otto was a big guy. He was a big target, and he was very good at blocking pitches and that were in the dirt and that might have been wild pitches. Similarly, he was very good. He had a very good arm and was very adept at holding runners at first or getting guys trying to steal. That was very, very important in that era because often a game was decided 2-1, 1-0, or 3-2. Go back and look at those ERAs from that era. The best ones are very, very low, and those best ones that are low usually had a really good catcher catching whoever the pitcher was. Here we go with 1912, and this is a colorized picture, but this was taken at the end of Brooklyn training camp. Here is Otto again in the front row. There is another catcher, Tex Irwin, next to him. There's Bill Dolan in the center. Over here is Zach Wheat, and here is up top is a little mystery. That is Wee Willie Keeler, who was not on the old Oriole, who was not on the roster that year, but apparently worked out with the Brooklyn team, and I believe became kind of an informal coach. He had played with the Dodgers earlier, and he was a Brooklyn guy to start with, so it's not too much of a stretch to see him in this particular picture. Here is a very idealized picture of what Ebbets Field looked like in 1913. Charlie Ebbets had a dream of opening a new ballpark because the previous ballpark, Washington Park in Brooklyn, part of which still stands, by the way, was practically an open sewer. It was an embarrassment. It smelled awful. Players didn't want to play there, and Ebbets wanted really the best. Brooklyn was considered itself its own city, even in 1913, and Ebbets wanted the best he could do for his hometown. Otto was an opening day catcher at Ebbets Field. Keep that in mind because we're going to come to it again in about 20 minutes when we close out in Ebbets Field. There is a picture of how it really looked. Notice no motor vehicles in this particular picture, maybe one or two if you look very carefully. But of course, people got there either on foot or by trolley in Brooklyn, often by walking through Prospect Park. It's a very homey place. Uh, I don't know whether there's anybody else here who remembers it. I unfortunately never got there myself. The Dodgers moved out of Brooklyn when I was 10 years old. This is how the lower stands looked. That's later in the year 1913. Yeah, I know it wasn't opening day because they had sleet and hail that day, and it was quite cold. And those people are in shirt sleeves. That looks like a summer crowd to me. Here's the view from the left field stands. Back then, even like today, even though you bought a seat, you had to stand to see the game. Eventually, grandstand went in out there. Otto's teammates included Zach Wheat, Knapp Rucker, and Jake Galbert. This is now maybe about 1914. There's still maybe 1913, and you can kind of see in retrospect the nucleus of a very, very good team for the 1910 to 1920 epoch of professional baseball in New York. Also, an exciting rookie named Charles Casey Stengel joined the team in 1912. At the end of the season, he hit, I can't see it, but I think it was like 317, 315. At the end of the year, was very popular with the writers and very quickly became one of Otto's best friends. In fact, they were road roommates for a couple of years early in Casey's career. Note that Casey was with the team because this was obviously a very, very happy part of Casey's life when he played for Brooklyn in the early part of the um, in the early part of the century. One could say, how miserable can you be if you're 20 some years old playing baseball? Well, not too much, but again, you'll see later on he remembered this particular era very, very favorably. Casey was always a character. The press loved him. And yes, he really did wear sunglasses in the outfield in 1912. Problem was Brooklyn finished seventh again in 1912, but things were starting to change. In 1913, the press began to fall in love with Otto Miller. Bergen was a thing of the past, and Otto developed his skills through more playing time into one of the top defensive catchers of the dead ball era. And he could field and hit. If you remember Bergen's batting average of 170 lifetime, Otto hit 272 in 1913, third highest on the team. And this is a team that featured Zach Wheat and Casey and a couple of other future Hall of Famers. The team was starting to take shape. If I can dwell for a second on the cartooning here, normally in this era, cartoons, drawings, artwork like this in newspaper was relegated to the editorial pages. People, drew cartoons about politicians, about foreign wars and things, but there were several artists in Brooklyn at the various papers. There were 5 or 6 daily papers in Brooklyn at the time who were they were great baseball fans and they just started to draw baseball pictures. And finally, the sports editor of the paper, I've got a longer series about it in the book. The sports editor said, "These are really good. Let's start printing these." And sports illustrations began to appear in American newspapers as a result of this. Otto Miller joins the Benedicts today. A Benedict is an old-fashioned way of saying someone who took his vows. So Otto had met a Brooklyn girl named Madeline Dowd. They got married. And if you take a look down at the bottom of this article, oops, sorry, let's go back. You'll see Charlie Stengel will be the best man. Casey and Otto were so close that Casey was the best man at Otto's only marriage in his lifetime. This is a press pass from 1916, and I wish I owned it because I saw one that sold for $3,000 on eBay recently. This one is particularly interesting to me because you can, whoops, let's go back again. Having a little trouble with my cursor. Here we go. If you look down here, you can see admit Mr. Otto Miller. That's Otto's signature. I know what it looks like because I saw it several times when I was writing the book. That's Charles Ebbets, president of the Brooklyn Club. And look over there if you can. You see a little faint S, probably Otto's handwriting. Instead of Mr. Otto Miller, this one is for Mrs. Otto Miller. And Otto's wife was a regular attendee at the games at Ebbets Field. Interesting point because the Brooklyn Club in the National League, for reasons that I've never completely understood, always had a higher percentage of female spectators in the stands than any other team in the National League. I don't know whether it was an offshoot of the informality of the borough, of a working class attitude of I'm going to do whatever I want. Often there's a couple of other words in that expression when used in Brooklyn, but nonetheless, Madeline Miller was very prominent at many Dodger games, and that I would love to have had that card. That was obviously in their hands. 1916, Brooklyn was ready. Wilbert Robinson had succeeded Bill Dolan as manager. Rube Marquardt had joined the team from the New York Giants. The press nicknamed the team the Robins, and they were ready to go. Veteran catcher Jack Chief Myers also came over from the New York Giants to team with Otto behind home plate. Myers doesn't look too happy here. Too misspelled, sorry about that. Too happy here about it, but he was because, and I'll tell you in just a minute, Myers, interesting, loved being called chief, and there seems to be a sort of revisionist attitude or whatever to refer to him now as Jack Myers because I suppose chief is politically incorrect. But I also knew a player named Jim Nielsen who played for the New York Rangers, hockey player, and he loved being called chief. He called himself the chief. And Craig Berube, who's the coach of the Flyers now, I did sports writing covering hockey in Philly for a while. Referred to him as the chief, and he loved the name. So I still refer to Myers as chief because if he were here, he would have corrected me with this Jack stuff. Anyway, Brooklyn won their first pennant of the modern era, 1916, and Otto would not have missed the picture, but he has moved to the back row. There you see him in the middle, and over here I did a cut of the larger picture, and there he is. And this was Brooklyn first great team in the National League in the middle, toward the end of the dead ball era and just before World War I. Notice, by the way, these are, I guess, people who worked for the team who were hanging out behind the team picture who managed to get themselves in anyway. They would play the Red Sox in the World Series. Red Sox had a young pitcher named Babe Ruth. Here's a photographer's pass. Here's a sample of something that I should have edited out, but it's the World Series program from 1920. They used the same one for Ebbets Field in 1920 and 1916. Wilbur Robinson, the manager, obviously. Game 3 was the first World Series game ever played at Ebbets Field. Ernie Shore of Boston beat Rube Marquardt 6-5. This might have been your ticket, but to Game 3, not Game 1. I'm sorry, the first Shore beat Marquardt in the first game of the World Series. It was played at Braves Field in Boston. Fenway was available, but Braves Field was much bigger. So the Boston management put the game into the largest place for the simple reason that the only revenue really was from attendance. Game 2, Sherry Smith of Brooklyn, seen here on the right next to Otto, his battery mate, was the starting pitcher, and he matched up against Babe Ruth, October 9th, 1916, in what was a tremendous one of the greatest World Series games ever. Ruth and Smith pitched complete games. I believe it went 14 innings. Um, sorry, that's game two we're talking about. Ruth pitched brilliantly. Brooklyn had 6 hits. Otto had one of them. Miller figured prominently in one of the game's critical plays, however. Al Janvin, the Boston second baseman, tried to score on a sac fly in the bottom of the ninth. High Myers, the Brooklyn center fielder, caught the ball, threw to the plate. Miller, 6 feet, 195, stood his ground at, as the 5'11", 165 Janvin charged and tried to kick the ball out of his hands. This was no small collision. You can see it here. If you look very carefully, that's Janvin sliding in. Notice that Miller is not trying to block the play. He's trying to make a swipe tag at this guy. And Janvin is using his right foot like a football player or a soccer player, trying to kick the ball out of Miller's hands. Another note, this fellow here, the umpire, man named Bill Dineen. Bill Dineen, became one of the top umpires of the pre-World War I era, and he had been one of the main pitchers for the Boston Red Sox or Red Stockings in the 1903 World Series. He was the losing pitcher of the second game and then won 3 more games in the series. So he was the first modern pitcher to win 3 games in a World Series. All the others, I believe, were 3-0 because the series was shorter. He had really a great baseball career and by all accounts, a true gentleman. Notice, by the way, since we have a little extra time, the background. This is Braves Field in Boston as it existed in 1916. No grandstands, no upper decks or anything, just places to sit, benches, wooden planks, going on as far as the eye can see. Same play. Notice this was perhaps a composite photo, but it ran in the newspapers of the era. And that's Janvin on the ground. This one obviously follows chronologically from the previous one. Notice that Miller has made the tag and already has, within the space of about 1 second, has the ball in his right hand, looking to see where the runners are. And Dineen still has his hand up, making the call, making the out call. The game then went on to 14 innings. Sherry Smith and Ruth did, as I said, both pitch complete games. Brooklyn won game 3 in the World Series at Ebbets Field. The Sox won the series 4-1. As I said, the 16 Brooklyn team was the first great team of the 20th, Brooklyn team of the 20th century. We see here 4 of Otto's teammates, Jake Daubert, George Cutshaw, Ivy Olson, and Mike Mowry. 1917, what can you say about it? This kind of sums up the baseball season right here. It's a horrible year for the world and a very bad year for Brooklyn. Most of the players either had war-related jobs or were called into the army. I prowled everywhere, and look at this. I found Otto's draft card, his draft registration card. And you can see down on the left where he claims an exemption from service, as was his right, because he was supporting his wife. He lists his employer as his profession as professional baseball player and for the Brooklyn National League Club, Brooklyn, New York. There's nothing wrong with this. Obviously, it's just a very, to my mind, very poignant document. He ended up registering for World War II also. 1917, Brooklyn dropped to 7th. Those are random shots that I found on the internet by some unknown photographer who took pictures in 1917 at a game at Ebbets Field. This is a full-length picture of Otto as you saw him before, with the flag on the uniform And this is a very interesting picture of him because that's kind of what he was like. He was just a big, strong, gregarious guy, um, and always seemed to be in good spirits. Much later, after his death, his wife went through some private papers and discovered that more than a few times he had been fined by the National League for having fist fights with coaches from other teams or players from other teams, but he always took it out of the view of kids. He took it under the grandstand. Meet me after the game and we'll settle this. Affected by the war and the war's aftermath, Brooklyn had off years in 17, 18, and 19. So let's jump to 1920. Otto was already in his 11th year with the club. And as you can see, he's trimmed down a little. That's him again now in the back row. And this is a team that was very, very successful on the field. It was a strange season. Brooklyn played a 26 inning tie with Boston, with the Boston Braves in Boston. But they were back in the Fall Classic again against one of the greatest Cleveland teams ever. All of which I should step out of this for a second and just remind you that the 1920 Indians were the team that had, I think it was Ray Chapman, the second baseman who was killed at second base on a pitch that was thrown, a beanball that was thrown against the Yankees or the Highlanders, as some people still called them. It was not at Yankee Stadium, remember, because Yankee Stadium didn't open to 1923. It was at the Polo Grounds. So it was a very emotional year for Cleveland, and the fact that they won the pennant was something a little special. And as you can see down here, that is Bill Wambsgans, the second baseman, and that is the armband that the team continued to wear through the year for their fallen second baseman. Brooklyn team 1920 was led by Burley Grimes, who continued to throw a legal spitball. He would moisten his hand, whether he was going to throw the spitball or not, just so the batter would be confused as to whether it was coming or not. Top hitter was Zach Wheat, who hit 328. That's Hy Myers, very good center fielder of the era. Otto hit 289. Remember when catchers only hit 170 or 200? Otto hit 289 while playing excellent defense. Picture on the right is Zach Wheat with his long overdue Hall of Fame plaque, which I think was given to him. I believe he was elected in 1956. I can actually remember it happening, and I had never heard of him. Of course, I was only 9 years old, even though people think I was old enough to have seen him play. But no, um, there's the League Park in Cleveland, where the series was played. After 4 games, the series was tied 2-2. The teams Brooklyn and Cleveland played on October 10th at League Park. There it is from the air. It was a very similar park to Ebbets Field, very cozy, very neighborhood, not a lot of building around the stands, almost bucolic compared with some of the things that eventually came up in American cities. As you can see, it was popular among kids because you didn't have to pay to get in. October 10 was already a day of baseball history. Cleveland had 7-0 going to the 5th inning. The game was all Cleveland so far, and the crowd of 28,000 had already witnessed the first grand slam in the World Series and the first home run by a pitcher in the World Series. But 5th inning, Brooklyn began a comeback. First second baseman Pete Kilduff single to left. That's Kilduff on the right, who was a regular second baseman. Otto Miller batting 8th, as he did almost every game in his career, singled sharply to center field. Now Brooklyn had runners on first and second. That brought up Clarence Mitchell, the pitcher. Mitchell, a spitballer, was an outstanding hitter. He also played first base and the outfield in his career. In an 18-year major league career, he posted a 252 batting average, scored 138 runs, hit 7 home runs, and drove in 138 runs. He also won more than 100 games. He was not an easy out, and Cleveland knew it. Cleveland knew that he was not at the plate to bunt, so he swung away and hit a hard line drive slightly to the right of second base. It seemed to be headed for center field. Kilduff took off from second. Miller took off on contact from first. Both guys were running with their heads down, and the ball was caught by Bill Wamsgans, who had shaded an extra 2 steps towards second just before the pitch. So that's one out. The batter is out because of the catch by Wamsgans. Wamsgans then stepped on second base to retire Kilduff, who was already at third base. You can see Kilduff down in the bottom of this picture, looking back at second, trying to figure out what was going on. And then Wamsgans confronted a very stunned Otto Miller. There's Otto, absolutely flummoxed, standing there. And according to one of the newspapers, he said to Wamsgans, "What ball is that?" And Wamsgans said, "The one that was just hit." And then Wamsgans was very nice guy, just politely tagged Miller. It was the end of the only unassisted triple play to date in the World Series. It happened probably within the space of about 4 seconds, and reporters who covered the game said that it happened, and there was just this incredible silence through League Park because people couldn't believe what they had just seen. And somebody in a press box was thinking fast enough to get that incredible moment. You know what I love about this picture? Look at the umpire down here. I forget who the umpire is, but he's standing there as if he saw this every day. It's unassisted triple play, man. It's the World Series. There's only 2 umpires on the field. Anyway, Wamby smiled at Miller, tagged him politely on the arm to complete the unassisted triple play. Then the next day, they decided to rub it in a little. There's Wamsgans smiling, and his 3 victims. Newspaper reporters posed the 4 of them the next day. This picture circulated all over the country in the newspapers. That's Wamsgans, obviously, Kilduff, Mitchell, and Otto Miller over here on the right. Interesting thing about the picture, look how much bigger and brawnier Miller is than everybody else. Now, granted, these guys are infielders, but this guy's a pitcher and he was not a small man. Miller was a big guy for the era, and that accounted for some of his success. Otto doesn't look happy, but he put up with the picture anyway. Miller remained with Brooklyn as a player for 1921 and 1922, though the Brooklyn teams quickly dropped out of contention. He remained one of the best defensive catchers in baseball. I think that's the Polo Grounds on the right, Miller as a visiting catcher. He became friendly with Babe Ruth during his many years in New York. Otto frequently hung out with the Babe at spring training camp. This is, I think, in Arkansas, again, where the Dodgers continue to play from time to time. Ruth arrived unannounced, driving a huge car and couldn't wait to get on the field, didn't even change into a uniform. Who knows if he even had one, just grabbed a glove and they started to play a pepper game and do some warm-ups with the rest of the Brooklyn players. Miller received his unconditional release at the end of the 1922 season. He had spanned the dead ball era and remained active, a mentor to pitchers and young catchers into the roaring 20s in TNT baseball, which was, of course, defined by the home run. He remains one of the best spitball catchers of all time. Rather than leave baseball, however, he became the playing manager of the Atlanta Crackers of the Southern Association in 1923. His team just missed winning the Southern Association pennant. He announced in the preseason that he had become a vegetarian to try to control his weight. Who would have known a major league catcher in the 1920s being a vegetarian? But there you have it. 1924, he became a playing coach with the Indianapolis Indians. And since I always find him, where is he here? Sorry, let's go back. I'll show you this. This is Johnny Bush, who was the manager, who is best remembered as the manager of the Pittsburgh Pirates in 1927, who had the honor of playing the greatest team ever in the World Series. Miller is, sorry, number 10. Here we go. Second row for a change. There we go. But Otto had a wife and family in Brooklyn. So in 1925, he stayed home in the city and played exhibition games for the amateur Brooklyn Bushwicks. Dexter Park, which it doesn't exist anymore. It was actually not in Brooklyn. It was just across the line in the borough of Queens. A scorecard would have cost you a nickel back then. You can see the great players who took a final tour with the Bushwicks. 1926, great fanfare, still popular in New York. Miller returned to Brooklyn as a pitching and catching coach. He coached under Wilbert Robinson, Max Carey, and finally under Casey Stengel, 1934 to 1936. That's Robinson, Miller in the middle, Max Carey on the far right. Popular around the league. This was an anonymous, unmarked picture that I found on the internet. Very obvious to me, Otto Miller during his coaching days. You could tell by the uniform. And that is a great shot of the old Polo Grounds, which was the home of the New York Giants, 155th and 8th Avenue, and for 2 years, the home of the New York Mets. One of the first double-decker stadiums in the major leagues. Got to visit old friends who were still staying active, such as Babe Ruth, who was with the Boston Braves in 1935. Ruth had 6 home runs and 72 at bats. This is obviously when Miller was a coach. I can almost put a date on it because Brooklyn only played Boston once that season when Ruth was still within the team. I believe that was April 1935. 1930s were the times of the Daffy Dodgers. Management changed. Out went Casey and his whole coaching staff, Babe Herman, to find the team for better or worse. Otto had a family and loved Brooklyn. He stayed active in the borough. He ran a bar 2 blocks from Ebbets Field. And down on the bottom, you can see him coaching some college kids from St. John's University. People used to come to Otto's bar with postcards, and they would get him to autograph them, and then they would send them to their friends who were Dodger fans who'd moved out of New York. Miller was a regular at one of the bowling alleys at the Farragut Lanes. This is why I called him a Brooklyn guy. Brooklyn was an immigrant borough, and a friend of mine from Brooklyn says that, yeah, Miller was an immigrant from Nebraska. It was probably just about as big a culture shock also, but he just loved the place and stayed there for his entire life, with the exception of the 2 years he went away to coach and manage in the minor leagues. Sorry, that's Ruth with Babe Herman. And we're in 1944 now. Otto was a regular at many baseball events, such as the 1944 War Bonds games, which were for charity, played at the Polo Grounds in New York. You can see Zach Wheat, long retired as a coach. They had honorary coaches for all 3 New York teams. Down here at the far end is Otto Miller coaching for the Dodgers. This is Hooks Wiltse, who was a great pitcher for the 1905 and 1907 New York Giants under John McGraw. And this dude here is Bill Clem, the great umpire. All these people assembled. I believe there were 44 to represent the franchises. They had to share dugouts because there were only 2 dugouts for 3 teams. And the big winner was, I think, $44,000 was raised for the war effort. That is what a 3-way box score looks like. I wouldn't want to have to go through that one every day. Final score, Brooklyn 5, Yankees 1, Giants nothing. Here's why I mentioned remember these names. In 1949, when Casey Stengel won his first pennant with the Yankees, Remember, he spent his early years with the Dodgers. He wanted to give his teammates, who he remembered so fondly from 1916, a special moment at Ebbets Field. So, for the final time, all of the living members of the 1916 team were assembled at a very brief pregame ceremony at Ebbets Field. And it was I was only 2 years old, so I missed it, but um, it was a very, very poignant event, not on television, I don't think, but on radio. Casey introduced everybody. You can see Miller here, and that is Rube Marquardt next to him. If you go online or if you buy the book and prowl around, you can find this picture captioned, but you don't see it that often. Here's something very interesting. Over here, far left in the line, a gentleman named Art Dade, who was an amateur athlete and a trainer in Brooklyn in 1916 and often traveled with the club to treat minor injuries and um, anything else that a trainer might do in that era. Zach Wheat's brother was one of the catchers on the 1916 team. And the day before, or the final game of the year, Wheat's brother broke his finger catching the final game of the season. And the manager did not want to bring Miller into the game. Chief Myers was not available. So the trainer quickly suited up. That's the fellow over here, Art Dade, and caught 3 innings of Major League Baseball. It was the only time he ever appeared in a Major League game. But these guys were so close and remembered him so fondly that they all said, Artie's got to be here. Artie's got to be here. Artie's a member of the team as much as anybody else. And so he did, and they were all remembered on that particular day. 1957, when Ebbets Field closed forever to the National League Baseball, Otto, if you remember, caught the first official game at Ebbets Field. He was invited to catch the ceremonial first pitch of the final game. He accepted. It was Dodgers 2, Pittsburgh nothing. This is a ticket to the game, but even more poignant was 1960 when the park was demolished. Before the wrecking ball took the old place down, Otto presented Roy Campanella, the great Dodger catcher, with an urn of turf from behind home plate. The two old catchers commiserated. Campy played in 1,449 games for Brooklyn. Otto played in 927. Those numbers are from actual league games. Both of them, particularly Miller, played a lot more in barnstorming, exhibition, um, trips to Cuba, trips to other countries over his career. No other Brooklyn catcher came anywhere close. None ever will. Campy and Otto were very good friends for as long as they knew each other. They very, very few games in the grand history of the Brooklyn Dodgers did not have one of those two guys behind home plate, an absolute minority of games. This is really a horrible picture. Otto stayed to watch it. That's the destruction of Ebbets Field in 1960. He said, a lot of guys are afraid to cry. Not me. I'm not ashamed. And he stood there and watched the old park come down. He died of a fall, a tragic one, from an eye clinic or an eye hospital in Brooklyn in 1962. Some people said it was suicide. I do not believe it. He was not that type of man. He had had cataract surgery. He was in pain, but apparently there was a window that should have had a screen on it near a door, near a staircase. One way or another, he went through it. He was buried in Goshen, New York. His wife Madeline was buried beside him. She lived till only 2 more years after his death. And Miller was even remembered a few years ago by the Target company, who printed a series of the greatest Brooklyn or Los Angeles Dodger players of all time. As you can see, player from 1910 to 1922, coach 1926 to I think 1936, more than 3,600 games in a Brooklyn uniform, including all of those exhibition games, Cuban games. His net record will never be broken. And that's part of Otto Miller's story. Long ago, far away. It's another colorized picture. A father and a son going to a Brooklyn game, probably about 1922, 23. And that is where we are. Thank you for letting me talk to you about Otto Miller. Nobody can say you've never heard of him anymore. And it's a small audience, but to me, it's a very appreciative one. So we should have our first reunion a year from now or something in Brooklyn. Um, in any case, thank you. And if you want to bombard me with some questions, feel free.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions for Noel?
I have a couple. First
Go
of
ahead.
all, Noel, how did you decide to write a book about Otto Miller?
Um, it's that's a good question, and I kind of touched on it, but I wrote a book called The Giants at the Polo Grounds
Mhm.
about the New York Giants, and I wrote another book called The Last Game, the Final Game at Ebbets Field, and I wrote for Sports Illustrated for a number of years. I was not on staff, but I was a contributor, and whenever I would touch upon the Dodgers, his name would come up. And then I saw his name come up in reference to the triple play in the World Series. And then I was reading again, and he was involved in another triple play during a game, I think around 1912. It's one of the few people who've ever been a base runner in two triple plays in the major leagues. So all of this weird stuff just kept popping up. And of course, one reason was um, I guess just the karma of Brooklyn, New York, weird stuff happens. And second, he was there for a long time. He was a coach in the game that in which the Dodgers had three runners at third base. And he was supposed to have been the third base coach that inning. But it was a hot day and he wasn't feeling that good, and somebody else went out to take the coaching position um, on that particular half inning. So I kept seeing the name, and I thought, well, I got to find out more about this guy. And the more I read and the more I researched, um, the more I just decided, all right, I'll take a break from the fiction and see if I can pull a book together. It was not the easiest thing, and one reason was, um, it wasn't until post-war that reporters really went into the locker room to get quotes from players after the game. Dick Young was one of the first to do it, and it was maybe about 1947. So you really didn't get too many quotes from players if you're reading the 1920s newspapers. The press, the locker rooms were closed, so you kind of had to piece it together. So I think that kind of perhaps obliquely answers the question how I decided to do it. It's more like how could I decide not to do it?
Um, Second question is, why did the Dodgers have so many different nicknames during that time? I can see the Robins with a team managed by Robinson, but what about the Superbas? And I guess they started out as Dodgers is a contraction of Trolley Dodgers and so on. But
It's that's a very interesting question, and Um, it actually, as a writer, it got to be a little difficult because do you really call them the Dodgers in 1910? Because they weren't really the Dodgers, except informally in Brooklyn, they had somehow picked up that name. Um, Early on, they were called the Superbas because they were named after a professional acting troupe. And then a lot of players, like eight of them, got married one winter, one off season. So the press started to call them the bridegrooms. So then the nickname, the Dodgers, always sort of was an informal nickname, sort of like the Pirates were never formally known as the Bucks, but plenty of people in Pittsburgh still call the team the Bucks from Buccaneer, obviously. And then in the when Wilbur Robinson took over, it was kind of a natural to call them the Robins, but they didn't actually change their name formally until about 1932. And the funny thing was, I can remember when I was a kid, my father was a newspaper junkie, and he would get the New York Daily News as well as the New York Times and the Herald Tribune, and the back of the tabloid Daily News would frequently refer to Brooklyn as the Flock, and the Flock was a nickname that came from the Robins.
Uh,
And how oblique is that? I mean, that's a nickname coming out of another nickname.
my last question is really not a question, just an observation. Is that this kind of book, where you're writing about something from the history of baseball, but you're also writing about the era in our country, and I love this kind of book because you know, and maybe it's because I'm older now and I've lived more years and lived through many eras and so on. But I love seeing how the country was different at that time and comparing, the political environment or the social environment and so on. So I think that, yeah, every time I look for a new book to read about baseball, it's usually something like this, or like your book about the year of the Sputnik, 1957. That's the next book I'm going to read, in fact.
Well,
So
thank you. You'll find a lot of I don't want to say digressive or discursive stuff, but it's hard to really understand how much baseball represents without really understanding where the United States was at a certain time. It's how do you understand wartime baseball, 1943, for example, 1944, without understanding that, most men were off fighting.
mhm,
And one of the things about the Sputnik season was how it was a crazy time. I actually, 1957 was the first year that I can really remember clearly from personal observation. And my family lived in Connecticut at the time, and needless to say, there was all this fear of a nuclear war, fear of being bombed. We had fallout shelters. I mean, it seems quaint at the time, but I remember my father and mother took me and my late older sister outside. We had a nice lawn in Connecticut, and my father pointed to the sky to a moving object, and he says, "That's Sputnik. The Russians put it up there." And it was absolutely mind-blowing
mm,
um, that anybody could put something up that you could see with a naked eye. And I said, Where is it? Like a couple 100 feet up?" And no, it's 2 miles up or
yeah,
3 miles up. I guess it was higher than that because
yeah,
planes were 2 miles up. It was, it, as my father would have said, "Well, it's way the hell up there. That's all you need to know." Um, and the damn thing was going over our house as far as we were concerned. There were flying saucer scares. Somebody ran a newspaper article in Washington. You'll find it in the book about Washington being invaded by flying saucers. And this was a mainstream paper. This was not the National Enquirer. Um, it was just crazy time. And I know I'm going off on a tangent. That's how I write. But I had, I, I grew up with a couple friends who were sons and daughters of people who were blacklisted from Hollywood in the 1950s. And
mm,
man, the stories they told about um, some very well-known people who basically ratted out their parents. I mean, it was scary stuff.
mhm,
So all of this was going on in the 50s. And how do you write about National League Baseball or American League Baseball, which still had two teams that hadn't integrated yet at the start of the season,
mm,
without going into where we were socially in that
yeah,
era? So
yeah,
frankly, it's one of the things I love about SABR audiences because you get men and women who are a lot of them are better historians than I am. And they, they'll ask me about certain points, but they understand what I'm talking about with, bringing in all of those social references. It's
Yeah.
another way of saying that I can't really shut up when I find a fascinating topic, but
I mean, yeah, well, that's just, and the 50s especially, you and I are probably about a year apart in age. And and so I remember the 50s very vividly. Remember that time socially as well as with baseball. I mean, in 1955, I was actually saw a Negro League baseball game, even though the Negro Leagues were in decline by that, well in decline by that time. So and I saw Satchel Paige pitch when he was pitching in the International League after he left the major leagues. So, I have all these memories, and I love reading about these stories and these accounts of players and teams and so on from that era. So,
sure.
thank you
If
for
you don't
doing
mind
it.
my asking, where did you grow up?
Rochester, New York.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, that was
So
a Cardinal. That was, I don't have to tell you, that was a Cardinal farm team around that time, right?
that's right. It was, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Although
because you,
my whole family were Yankee fans, so but in fact, I started paying attention to baseball a little bit in 1955 in the World Series when the Dodgers beat the Yankees, but more so in '56 when Larson pitched his perfect game and so on. And after that, baseball was in my blood. So,
so you probably remember Vaughn McDaniel.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yep,
Well, welcome to the Sputnik season. I've
yeah.
covered him pretty well.
That's right. And what was he? 7-5, and he never won another game in the major leagues or something.
You got it.
Yeah,
You got
yeah.
it.
So anyway, so thank you for the book. I'm looking forward to reading the 1957 book.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Bob, you have any other questions? No. All right.
None from me.
All right. Well, Noel, we really appreciate your time. And like I said, you're uh, a much more well-written person than most of the folks we've had join us in our group, and we're very thankful that we could have you tonight. Thank you for a great
Well,
presentation.
you're welcome, but don't forget I got a head start on most of them. I've been doing this for quite a while.
I understand, but I'm looking forward to reading some of your books now that I know about them. So not only did I not know about Otto Miller, I didn't know about Noel Hynd. So
Well,
I'm very glad that I got to meet you and listen to your story about Otto Miller.
yeah, I have, by the way, remember I mentioned those postcards that he would sign at the bar?
Yeah.
I have one.
Oh,
I
gee.
found it on eBay. So
Wow.
I've actually got something that was in his hand. So there you
Wow.
go. Anyway,
Awesome.
Drew, thanks very much for the invitation. And I know it was a small group, but I really enjoyed talking to you guys.
All right. Thanks, and
Thank you,
have a
Noel.
good
We
evening.
enjoyed
Thank
it.
you, Noel.
Thank you.
Drew, are we staying on?